Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it, and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. I never imagined my corner of Houston would become the epicenter of civilization's collapse. 20 years running Bishop's Firearms and Supply, teaching people about preparedness, and still nothing could have readied me for what happened that Tuesday morning. The day started like any other. I was restocking the display cases, arranging the newest shipment of handguns while watching the morning news. The stories were getting stranger by the hour. Reports of violent attacks, hospitals overwhelmed, entire neighborhoods quarantined. But Houston's a big city. Strange things happen all the time. My shop sits on the corner of Mason and 23rd, a solid 2-story brick building that's been here since the 70s. The store takes up the ground floor, while I live in the apartment upstairs. It's not much, but it's home. The large display windows give me a clear view of the street, and the Methodist Hospital stands directly across from me, its modern glass facade reflecting the morning sun. Round 9 a.m., I noticed something odd. The hospital parking lot was filling up fast, way more than usual for a Tuesday. Ambulances kept arriving, their sirens piercing the quiet morning. But they weren't leaving. They just kept coming, one after another, like a tide that wouldn't ebb. Dominic, my regular morning customer, came in looking pale. He works security at the hospital. "Wade," he said, using my first name, which he never does. "Something's wrong, really wrong." His hands were shaking as he counted out cash for ammunition. "The ER's full. They're sending people away. Never seen anything like it." I was about to ask more when the power flickered. Just for a second, but enough to make us both look up. The news station had gone to static, then cut to an emergency broadcast. The anchor's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her fear. "Advising all residents to stay indoors. If you or anyone you know exhibits symptoms including high fever, aggressive behavior, or unexplained wounds, do not attempt to make contact. Seek immediate medical..." The broadcast cut out again. When it came back, it was just the emergency alert system's monotone beep. By noon, the streets had erupted into chaos. Cars packed the roads, creating a deafening symphony of horns and screeching tires. People were abandoning their vehicles, carrying whatever they could. I watched a woman in scrubs sprint past my window, her white coat stained with something dark. She was crying. I started getting calls from my regular customers. Everyone wanted ammunition, guns, anything I had in stock. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. I knew I should have closed up, gone upstairs, and locked everything down. But these were people I'd known for years. They trusted me. They'd listened to my lectures about being prepared. That's when I saw the first one. A man stumbled out of the hospital entrance. Even from across the street, I could tell something was wrong with his movements. He walked like his limbs were controlled by invisible strings, his head tilted at an impossible angle. Blood covered the front of his hospital gown, dripping onto the pavement with each step. Dominic saw it too. "Lock the door," he whispered. "Lock it now." I didn't move fast enough. The man's head twisted toward my shop, his movements suddenly precise and predatory. He launched forward with frightening speed like a starved animal spotting prey. Behind him, more figures emerged from the hospital entrance. Dominic helped me get the security gate down just as the first impact hit the door. The metal rattled in its frame as bloody hands pounded against the glass. I could see their faces now, pressed against the window. Their eyes were vacant, pupils blown wide, faces contorted into expressions of primal hunger. "Get upstairs," I told Dominic. "Now." We spent the next hour barricading the entrance. I always kept plywood sheets handy. Houston gets its share of hurricanes, but I never thought I'd be using them like this. We boarded up the windows while more of them gathered outside, their relentless pounding creating a rhythm that made my skin crawl. As the sun began to set, I stood at my upstairs window, watching the city I'd known my whole life spiral into anarchy. Smoke rose from several blocks away. The hospital's emergency lights cast an eerie glow across the street, illuminating the growing crowd of infected gathered below. Dominic sat at my kitchen table, his head in his hands. "My wife," he said quietly. "She was working the morning shift today." I didn't know what to say. The hospital's windows reflected the dying sunlight, and somewhere in there, answers waited. But for now, all we could do was survive. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The next 12 hours would test everything I believed about preparedness, about humanity, and about myself. And not everyone would make it through the night. The setting sun painted Houston's skyline in shades of crimson as I set up my observation post on the roof. My Remington 700 felt reassuring against my shoulder, the scope offering a clear view of the chaos unfolding below. Dominic had insisted on coming up with me, carrying extra magazines and a pair of binoculars. The flat roof of my shop gave us a commanding view of 6 blocks in every direction. I'd spent countless hours up here over the years, making improvements. A makeshift shelter against the weather, storage boxes bolted down, even a rain collection system. Never thought I'd be using it as a sniper's nest. Through my scope, I watched the infected move through the streets. Their patterns were becoming clearer. They responded to sound, movement, anything that suggested prey. When they caught sight of a survivor, they moved with terrifying speed, like sprinters exploding from the starting block. "West side by the pharmacy," Dominic whispered, tracking movement with his binoculars. I swung my rifle around, finding what he'd spotted. A young woman was trying to reach her car, moving carefully between abandoned vehicles. 3 infected had already noticed her. I steadied my breathing, finger curling around the trigger. The first shot cracked through the evening air. The nearest infected dropped, giving the woman precious seconds. My second shot found its mark, but the third infected was too close to her position. She made it to her car just as its bloody fingers scraped across her window. The engine roared to life and she reversed hard, the infected tumbling beneath her wheels. "She made it," Dominic confirmed, his voice tight with relief. As night approached, the scope's illuminated reticle helped me track movement in the growing darkness. The hospital's emergency lighting created pools of sickly yellow light, perfect for spotting both survivors and infected. I started mapping patterns in my head, which streets were clear, which were death traps. Where the infected seemed to cluster. The parking garage 2 blocks south had become a killing zone. The infected gathered there, drawn by the sounds of trapped survivors trying to reach their cars. Every few minutes, someone would make a break for it. Some made it, most didn't. "Got movement at the bank," Dominic reported. "Looks like they're trying to barricade the entrance." Through my scope, I could see 3 men pushing a heavy desk against the bank's glass doors. More infected were approaching from both directions. I squeezed off 2 quick shots, dropping the nearest threats. The men looked up at the sound and I used my rifle's muzzle flash to signal them. 3 quick flashes, letting them know they weren't alone. The hours ticked by as we maintained our vigil. Each shot had to count. I had plenty of ammunition stored, but every gunshot drew more infected to the area. I kept my firing disciplined, only taking shots when lives were immediately at risk. Around midnight, the power grid failed sector by sector. Blocks of buildings went dark in sequence, like dominoes falling across the city. The only illumination came from scattered emergency lights, burning cars, and the quarter moon hanging above us. In that darkness, the infected became harder to track. Their movements were more erratic, but their hunting patterns remained consistent. They would freeze at any sound, then move toward it with ruthless efficiency. The darkness didn't seem to hinder them at all. "Wade," Dominic's voice cracked slightly. "The hospital's emergency generators just kicked in." The Methodist Hospital's backup systems flooded its lower floors with harsh fluorescent light. What we saw made my blood run cold. Dozens of infected moved through the corridors, pressing against windows, their shadows dancing across the walls. But it was the upper floors that caught my attention. Flashlights moving between rooms, shapes of people barricading doors. Survivors. I watched through my scope as small dramas played out in those lit windows. Medical staff trying to protect patients. people searching for supplies or escape routes. Some windows had makeshift signs, but they were too far to read clearly in the darkness. A series of gunshots erupted from the direction of the freeway, followed by screaming. Through my scope, I could see a group of looters who'd targeted the wrong store. The owner was well armed and waiting. I kept my rifle trained on the scene but didn't fire. This wasn't my fight. Movement on the roof. Dominic pointed toward the hospital's helipad. They're trying to signal someone. Medical staff were waving emergency lights, probably trying to attract a rescue helicopter. Their lights drew infected like moths to a flame, flooding into the building's upper levels. I watched helplessly as the staff retreated from the roof, their lights disappearing one by one. Dawn was still hours away when we heard the first explosion. A gas station 3 blocks east went up in flames, the fireball briefly turning night into day. The infected swarmed toward the noise and light, creating a temporary clear zone in other areas. "We need to document this," I said, pulling out a notebook. "Mark which buildings still have survivors, where the infected cluster, any safe routes we can find." For the next hour, we created a crude map of our immediate area. The hospital was clearly marked as both a danger zone and a refuge, infected on the lower floors, survivors above. We noted which streets were blocked by car wrecks, which buildings showed signs of life, where we'd seen the largest groups of infected gather. A pattern emerged. The infected seemed to flow like water, following paths of least resistance between buildings. When they encountered obstacles, they'd pile up until their sheer numbers forced a way through. Understanding their movement was key to survival. The night grew colder as we maintained our watch. Every so often, a burst of gunfire or a distant scream would pierce the darkness. The city was dying by inches, and all we could do was watch and wait. I checked my watch. 3 a.m. 9 hours since this nightmare began, and already the world had changed beyond recognition. Through my scope, I could see more infected pouring in from the suburbs, drawn by the chaos in the city center. They moved with a terrible purpose, like a flood of death washing away everything in its path. "Wade," Dominic's voice was barely a whisper. "Look at the hospital's 3rd floor." I adjusted my scope, focusing on the window he'd indicated. Someone had written something, large enough to be seen from our position. The message made my heart skip. "Help us." The pre-dawn hours brought an unearthly quiet. I'd taken position again on the roof, my rifle trained on the streets below, while Dominic worked on making our own sign visible from the hospital. We'd strung together some LED camping lights, spelling out, "Guns here, alive." The hospital's message had multiplied. More windows now displayed desperate pleas for help. Through my scope, I could see people pressing against the glass, waving frantically whenever they spotted movement. The lower floors remained overrun, teeming with infected who'd wandered in through broken doors and shattered windows. The first hint of military presence came at 4:47 a.m., the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. 3 Blackhawks swept over downtown, their searchlights piercing the darkness. Hope surged through me as I watched them circle the area. Maybe the government hadn't completely abandoned us. 20 minutes later, we heard the unmistakable rumble of heavy vehicles. A convoy of 5 Humvees and 2 armored personnel carriers rolled down Mason Street, led by a truck mounted with what looked like crowd control equipment. Soldiers in full tactical gear moved alongside the vehicles, weapons ready. "Finally," Dominic breathed. "They're going to clear the streets." I wasn't so sure. Through my scope, I could see the soldiers' faces. They looked young, scared, and unprepared for what they were facing. Their formation was tight, but their movements betrayed their uncertainty. The infected swarmed from everywhere at once. Alleys, broken storefronts, abandoned cars. The soldiers opened fire, their coordinated volleys dropping dozens of infected. But more kept emerging. The sound of gunfire drew hundreds more, converging from every direction. The convoy's crowd control equipment proved worthless against the horde. The infected ignored the rubber bullets, tear gas, everything. They simply absorbed the punishment and pressed forward, driven by their primal instincts. "They need to retreat," I muttered, watching the scene unfold through my scope. "There's too many." The soldiers fought well, maintaining discipline even as their position crumbled. But they were being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. One of the APCs had its hatch torn open, the screams of those inside silenced by the flood of infected pouring in. The other vehicles tried to reverse, but the streets were too choked with abandoned cars. I started taking shots, trying to help clear a path for their retreat. Through my scope, I watched a young soldier empty his magazine into the approaching horde before an infected grabbed his arm. His squad mates tried to help, but it was too late. The convoy scattered. 3 Humvees managed to break free, speeding away in different directions. The remaining vehicles became islands in a sea of infected. One Humvee, slightly apart from the main fight, still had its engine running. Its driver was alive, trapped inside while infected clawed uselessly at the reinforced windows. I kept my scope on that vehicle, watching as its driver, a female soldier based on the long hair, tried repeatedly to find an escape route. She'd push forward a few feet, then have to stop as infected blocked her path. Dominic had rigged up a signal mirror, trying to catch her attention. When she finally spotted our lights, we saw her grab something from her passenger seat, a tactical torch. She began signaling in Bunai. "She's using Morse code," Dominic said, grabbing a pen. "Clear. Path." I quickly flashed back, working on it. For the next hour, we coordinated with her. I'd clear segments of the street with careful shots while she inched the Humvee forward. Getting gradually closer to our position, the infected kept appearing, but they couldn't breach her vehicle's armor. The hospital survivors had noticed our efforts. They'd positioned people with lights at various windows, creating a network of signals. When large groups of infected approached from blind spots, the hospital would warn us with light patterns we quickly learned to interpret. Through this improvised communication network, we learned more about the situation inside. The hospital's upper floors held about 40 survivors, including medical staff and patients. They had some supplies but no weapons. The infected controlled everything below the 3rd floor. The soldier, Lieutenant Pierce according to her signals, provided her own updates. The military's containment operation had failed across the city. Most units were pulling back to designated safe zones, but communication was breaking down. She'd lost contact with her command hours ago. Dawn was approaching when we finally got Pierce close enough to attempt a rescue. The hospital survivors coordinated with us, creating distractions at crucial moments by breaking windows on the opposite side of the street, drawing infected away from her position. "Wade," Dominic called out, his voice tight. "We've got movement at the bank, lots of it." Through my scope, I saw what had him worried. The infected who'd been trapped inside the bank had broken through the barricades. Dozens of them spilled onto the street, cutting off Pierce's approach to our building. I grabbed our signal mirror. "Stop. New threat." Pierce's response was immediate. "Running low on fuel." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The Humvee had enough armor to protect her, but once the fuel ran out, she'd be trapped. The hospital's warnings became more frequent as infected continued to flood the area. Drawn by our earlier gunfire, I made a quick decision, grabbing my backup rifle, a Remington 870 shotgun. "Cover me from here," I told Dominic. "I'm going to clear her a path." "That's insane," he protested, but I was already heading for the roof access door. The city's emergency services had long since given up trying to contain the fires burning throughout downtown. Smoke drifted through the streets, providing occasional cover but making it harder to spot threats. As I made my way down to the shop's main floor, I could hear the infected outside, their persistent scratching a reminder of how thin the barrier between survival and death had become. Through the gaps in our barricades, I watched Pierce's Humvee idle roughly about 50 yards away. The bank's infected were spreading out, creating an impenetrable wall between us. Above, I heard Dominic's rifle crack. He was doing his best to thin their numbers, but there were too many. I checked my weapons one last time, then grabbed a road flare from my emergency kit. If we were going to do this, we needed to be smart about it. The infected were drawn to sound and light. We could use that against them. The sun was rising over Houston, casting long shadows through the smoke-filled streets. In the growing light, I could see Pierce watching me through the Humvee's windshield. She nodded once, understanding what I was about to attempt. I took a deep breath, mentally mapping out my next moves. The morning air felt thick with tension as I prepared to step outside. Everything hinged on what happened in the next few minutes. The road flare ignited with a violent hiss, casting crimson light across the debris-strewn street. I hurled it as far as I could toward the bank, watching as infected immediately turned toward the noise and light. The diversion bought me precious seconds. Moving fast but deliberate, I cleared the shop's entrance. Dominic's rifle cracked steadily from above, each shot finding its mark. Lieutenant Pierce revved the Humvee's engine, pushing forward through the thinning crowd of infected. 20 yards separated us. I kept moving, the shotgun's weight reassuring in my hands. The first infected that got too close caught a blast that nearly took its head off. The sound drew more attention, but Pierce was almost within reach. The Humvee's engine coughed, sputtering ominously. "No, not now," I muttered, picking up speed. The vehicle lurched forward one last time before the engine died completely. Pierce was trapped, less than 30 feet from safety. I reached the driver's side door just as 3 infected charged from behind a wrecked car. The shotgun boomed twice more, buying us time. Pierce threw the door open, combat boots hitting pavement as she emerged with her sidearm ready. "Move!" she shouted, dropping an infected with a clean headshot. We ran together toward the shop, covering each other's blind spots. More infected emerged from the bank, but Dominic's precise fire kept them at bay long enough for us to reach the entrance. Once inside, we quickly resealed the barricades. Pierce leaned against a display case, catching her breath. "Thanks," she managed between gulps of air. "Thought I was dead out there." The immediate danger had passed, but the hospital survivors were getting more desperate. Their signals became increasingly frantic. The infected were slowly making their way up through the building's stairwells. "We need to help them," Dominic said, joining us downstairs. "There are families up there, kids." Pierce studied our crude map of the area. Even if we could reach them, how would we get that many people safely across the street? I was about to respond when movement outside caught my eye. An abandoned fuel tanker sat at the far end of the block, its hazard lights still blinking weakly. An idea formed. Dangerous, maybe insane, but possible. "We could draw them away," I said, pointing to the tanker. "That truck's full of gasoline. If we could detonate it." "The blast would attract every infected in the area," Pierce finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. "But how do we trigger it from here?" I moved to the rifle display, pulling out a scoped Remington 700 and 308. "Incendiary rounds, one good shot to the tank, and we create one hell of a distraction," Dominic added. "But we'd need to coordinate with the hospital. They'd have to be ready to move the moment it goes off." We spent the next hour planning and signaling instructions to the hospital. Through our makeshift communication network, we learned they had about 40 survivors strong enough to make the run. They'd organized themselves into small groups, the fastest going first to help secure a path for the others. Pierce used her tactical knowledge to help plot the safest route. They'll need to hug the building's wall, then sprint straight across. No stopping, no matter what happens. As the morning sun climbed higher, we made our final preparations. I positioned myself on the roof with the rifle while Dominic and Pierce readied the shop's entrance. We'd need to get people inside quickly once they started coming. The hospital signaled they were ready. I chambered an incendiary round, my breath steady as I lined up the shot. The tanker's fuel tank gleamed in my scope. "God forgive me," I whispered, and squeezed the trigger. The round struck true. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world exploded. The blast wave rattled windows for blocks. A massive fireball rose into the sky, followed by a column of thick black smoke. The effect on the infected was immediate. They swarmed toward the explosion like moths to a flame. As the horde moved away from the hospital, the first group of survivors emerged. They stuck to our planned route, moving quickly and quietly. The initial group made it across without incident, Dominic and Pierce rushing them inside. The second group wasn't as lucky. An infected emerged from beneath a car, grabbing a young woman's ankle. Her screams drew attention from others that hadn't been fully drawn away by the explosion. I could only watch helplessly through my scope as she disappeared under a mass of grasping hands. The scene devolved into chaos. Some survivors panicked, breaking from their groups and trying to run alone. Others froze in terror. A man carrying a young boy tripped on debris, both vanishing under a wave of infected before anyone could reach them. More groups made it across, but each attempt became increasingly dangerous as infected began filtering back into the area. Through my scope, I could see people still trapped in the hospital, their faces pressed against windows as they watched their chance of escape dwindle. "That's it," Pierce called up to me. "We can't risk any more runs. The street's too hot now." We'd managed to save 23 people, less than half of those who'd waited for rescue. The weight of those we'd lost settled over us like a shroud as we secured the shop's entrance one final time. Among the survivors was a marina worker named Cole, who'd been at the hospital for a minor injury when everything went bad. As we distributed water and tried to calm people down, he spoke up. "I work at the South Bay Marina," he said, his voice hoarse. "Got a 40-foot cabin cruiser there. If we could reach it." Pierce's eyes lit up. "The water. The infected can't swim." "How far is it?" I asked, already seeing where this was going. 6 miles, Cole replied. "But I know the back routes. If we had transportation, weapons." I looked around my shop, at the weapons, the ammunition, at Pierce's military training, at the desperate faces of the survivors. We had a chance, but we'd have to move soon. The infected would only multiply as time passed. "We can take the Humvee's radio," Pierce added. "Try to contact any military units still operating. There might be evacuations happening by sea." A plan was forming, but the sounds filtering in from outside were growing worse. Gunshots echoed from nearby streets. Screams. The city was falling deeper into chaos with each passing hour. If we were going to make a break for the marina, it had to be soon. The question was, how do we get 26 people safely through 6 miles of infected streets? The answer lay in my inventory logs. I had enough firepower to arm everyone capable of handling a weapon. With proper organization and Pierce's tactical experience, we might have a fighting chance. As I began pulling weapons from the storage room, a distant explosion rocked the building. Through the gaps in our barricades, we could see another pillar of smoke rising over downtown. Time was running out. "We leave at first light tomorrow," I announced, laying out rifles and handguns on the counter. "Everyone get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be hell." The survivors gathered in groups, speaking in hushed voices as night fell over Houston. None of us slept much, too aware of what waited outside. The infected's constant moans filtered through our barricades, a grim reminder of the gauntlet we'd have to run when the sun rose. I spent the night checking and rechecking our weapons, trying not to think about how many people we'd lost at the hospital. Tomorrow would be different. It had to be. The city burned around us as we waited for dawn, each of us knowing that our next move would either be our salvation or our end. Smoke veiled the rising sun as our group made final preparations. The military transport truck, an M35 cargo carrier, waited 50 yards down the street, our best chance for reaching the marina alive. Lieutenant Pierce divided our 26 people into tactical units, distributing weapons from my inventory. "Short, controlled bursts," she instructed, her voice cutting through the morning air. "Each shot attracts them. Make every round count." The more experienced handlers took point positions, creating a protective formation around those who couldn't fight. An elderly couple, 2 injured men, and a mother with young children. My remaining ammunition went to those with proven aim. "The truck's everything," Pierce said, tapping our route on the map. "Once secured, Cole guides us to the marina. He's 6 miles normally, but with the blockades, navigation's on me," Cole assured her, though his expression betrayed concern. I positioned myself on the roof, rifle ready. The street below remained deceptively quiet, but the wind carried distant sounds of the infected, that distinctive guttural moan that raised the hair on your neck. The first team advanced under Dominic's lead. They crossed 20 yards before an infected lunged from behind a car. Clean shots dropped it, but the noise drew others. They emerged from doorways and alleys, their ravaged forms illuminated by the morning light. The formation held initially, coordinated fire creating an effective barrier. From above, I eliminated flanking threats, each shot deliberate and precise. Then Murphy's Law kicked in with brutal force. One of the elderly men stumbled, his cane clattering across pavement. 2 others broke ranks to help, a fatal mistake. The infected swarmed from a storefront, overwhelming them in seconds. Their screams cut short as teeth found flesh. The main group pushed forward, but each gunshot pulled more infected into view. The street filled with writhing figures, forcing our people closer together. Dominic reached the truck first, his hands working the wiring while others provided cover. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. "Move to the vehicle," Pierce commanded. "Now!" Discipline dissolved into raw survival. A woman's rifle clicked empty, horror crossing her face as she froze. A young man lost his footing, vanishing under a tide of grasping hands. Each death added to the cacophony of gunfire and inhuman sounds. "Wade!" Dominic's voice crackled through my radio. "Need you mobile." I descended quickly. Half our group had reached the truck, others scattered in pockets of desperate resistance. A former officer created a temporary safe corridor with his shotgun, allowing 3 people passage before being cut off himself. His last stand bought precious seconds for others, until his ammunition ran dry. I found a girl paralyzed with fear, shoving her toward safety while Pierce covered our movement. The truck's engine revved as more climbed aboard. 30 seconds, I shouted. "We roll with whoever makes it." A woman's cry for help pierced the air. But she was too far, already surrounded. The mother and children scrambled aboard with moments to spare. I pulled myself up last, blasting away clawing hands with my final shotgun round. 9 people. Out of 26, only 9 made it. The M35 thundered through the devastated streets, Cole navigating from the cab. Each turn revealed fresh obstacles, abandoned vehicles, evidence of other failed escapes. The infected appeared in greater numbers as we approached the marina. The final stretch, a massive parking lot before the docks, swarmed with figures drawn by previous escape attempts. Dominic never hesitated. The truck plowed forward, the impact against a concrete barrier throwing us against the rails. "Cole's boat, end of Pier 3, Pierce directed. "Form up." We moved with grim purpose, our remaining ammunition precious as diamonds. Cole led us through the maze of vessels and containers, each shot carefully placed. His boat waited 30 yards away, but the open dock between us might as well have been a mile. The infected closed in, drawn by our earlier approach. 2 rounds left, someone reported. Similar calls followed. We were nearly dry at the worst moment. The final dash became pure adrenaline. Those with ammunition covered as others helped the exhausted aboard. I joined Pierce in raising the gangway, the infected's fingers inches from our boots. The engines hummed to life as Cole took the helm. We pulled away from the pier, leaving behind the grasping hands and haunting sounds that would live in our nightmares. Pierce raised someone on military channels. A defensive position on Galveston Island still held. We had fuel enough to reach it, assuming they'd accept us. I watched Houston recede, pillars of smoke marking where civilization had crumbled. We'd lost so many, each death adding to the weight of survival, but 9 of us had made it through that gauntlet of hell. The morning sun finally broke through the haze as we headed for open water. Behind us lay devastation. Ahead, uncertainty, but also possibility. 9 survivors carried the memories of those left behind and hope for whatever waited beyond the horizon. The gentle roll of waves replaced the sounds of horror as our boat pushed south. We'd seen humanity's darkness, but also its light, in every sacrifice that helped others live, in every hand extended to help. Now we had to honor that by surviving, by finding a way forward. The coastline slowly faded into distance as we cruised toward Galveston. None of us spoke. Some wounds were too fresh, some memories too raw, but we were alive. And for now, that had to be enough.